In this video, I'm discussing lessons learned from my trip to Piedmont, Italy, which was approximately 1 year ago during truffle season 2019. My name is John Jackson, and I'm also known as Attorney Somm. I'm known as Attorney Somm because while I practice law as a data privacy and intellectual property lawyer by day, when I'm not practicing law, I'm pursuing my passion for wine. I do that in several different ways. For example, I'm currently pursuing my WSET Level 4 diploma, and I'm about 2/3 of the way done with that. In addition, I run a wine page on Instagram under Attorney Somm, and I also publish articles relating to wine that have appeared in magazines such as Forbes and Texas Lawyer. And certainly whenever I get the chance, I also love to travel to and visit producers in various wine growing regions throughout the world. And I found that whenever I visit one of those regions, I always learn so much about the wines and the cuisine, and also just travel logistics, that I thought this video series would be an excellent way for me to provide value and to help people who also want to visit those regions. For this particular video regarding Piedmont, I'm going to have 3 travel-related tips and also 3 wine-related takeaways that I learned on my trip. We'll start first with the travel tips. My first tip is to make sure that you make your winery appointments early and to cluster them geographically. This is not an easy place to get around. It's important that you have a plan when you do your scheduling. Most of the wineries there do not allow drop-in visits. You typically only do 1 appointment in the morning and 1 in the afternoon. And so it's important that you book ahead and you plan so that you don't have to spend all your time on the road driving back and forth and getting lost. This is especially important because the visits tend to run long and they're very thorough. They like to talk a lot about their production methods, the aging process, and also their vineyards and what makes their wines unique. And so it's important to allow at least 1 hour, if not an hour and a half or more, for each of your visits. In addition, in terms of your itinerary, I would recommend spending at least 3 days in Barolo and Barbaresco combined, with at least 1 day spent in Barbaresco, and then 2 days in the Barolo area. I think it's also important to build in some downtime because you don't want to be racing back and forth such that you're so exhausted from your trip that you come home even more tired than when you left. It's also amazing to just be able to sit and overlook one of the vineyards in the Piedmont area and enjoy a nice glass of wine and not worry about rushing to the next visit. So I highly recommend including that in your itinerary as well. Especially if you're there during truffle season, I recommend that you go ahead and spend the 35 euros per person and get those truffles. I know it's a lot of money, but believe me, it's well worth it. Long after your trip is over, you're not going to remember the 35 euros, but you will remember the lasting memories and what an incredible dish that was, as well as the whole experience of having the truffles shaved on your dish right in front of you, tableside. Shifting gears now to the wine takeaways, we'll start with a white wine. In particular, during my first meal, I was looking at the wine list and trying to come up with a white wine. As you might imagine, I'm not a big Pinot Grigio guy, and so I also wanted a local wine that was indigenous to the area. What I found was Roero Arneis. Interestingly, when translated to English, Arneis means little rascal, and it's called that because it's very, very difficult to grow. The results are well worth it, however. This wine in particular drew my attention because it was produced by Bruno Giacosa, and yet it was extremely affordable. I was certainly familiar with Bruno Giacosa's red wines, and they're also carried with them a hefty price tag. However, this particular white wine was a relative bargain at around 30 or 35 euros. And so I immediately snatched it up, and we had that with the starter courses. I really enjoyed it. There was an intriguing mix of tropical, stone, and citrus fruits, some lemon and pineapple, peach and apricot flavors. There were also some intriguing floral notes and also a substantial amount of minerality. This was a fairly full-bodied wine, but it was also balanced by crisp acidity and a long finish. It paired perfectly with the starter courses that day. So it's one that I highly recommend that you look out for when you're visiting Italian restaurants or restaurants that may have a substantial collection of Italian wines on their list. I think you'll enjoy it. Shifting gears now to red wine, the second lesson I learned was that Barbera can be very, very good. In particular, I'm talking about Barbera de Alba. Before this trip, I mostly wrote off Barbera as an uninteresting, unexciting, by-the-glass wine. Again, however, I wanted to try Conterno wines, and I happened to spot a Barbera de Alba from Conterno on the list, again, for a very, very friendly price point. And it also happened to be from the 2016 vintage, and so we immediately snatched it up and gave it a shot. I was very, very impressed with this wine. It surpassed all my expectations. Like a typical Barbera, it certainly had some juicy fruit and mild tannins and some very, very pleasing acidity. However, it was also a somewhat complex wine that was very interesting to taste. And what I learned after trying this wine and in studying a little bit more detail is that there's a number of producers that have really picked up the quality and improved the Barbera de Alba wines in particular. And so now you can get some very, very serious Barbera de Alba wines that you can enjoy at a much younger age than your Nebbiolo-based wines, and also for a much more appealing price point. This particular wine, for example, had a lot of blackberry and plum and lavender, and even some floral notes, which I found very, very intriguing. Many of the other top producers in the region also have an outstanding Barbera de Alba these days, and so I'd also encourage you to try one of those. Lastly, my final takeaway is Barbaresco. Before this trip, I was mostly focused on the Barolo area. I had some Gaia, but otherwise I wasn't very, very familiar with a lot of the Barbaresco producers. Further, I knew that in the past there had been some problems with vintage variation, a lot of variability from year to year, and so it was oftentimes difficult to know if you were getting a consistent wine or not. Really had to be in tune with whether or not a particular vintage was good or not. However, what I learned is that with global warming, the vintages in Barbaresco are becoming more consistent and predictable, and the fruit is getting more consistently ripe each year. So for that reason, they've had a string of outstanding vintages, and 2015 and 16 in particular were very good. In particular, I highly recommend the Produttori wines. As you know from my other video, my Top Wine Value series, I highly recommend Produttori because it's not only an excellent value, but it's got some exceptional quality as well. In fact, in many instances, I think that it outdrinks some of the Barbarescos in the region that cost 4 to 5 times more. The 2016 in particular was very, very outstanding. With respect to the wine, I would recommend that you enjoy Roero Arneis for your white wine at the beginning of a meal, that you try some Barbera de Alba, and also that you give Barbaresco a shot, because I think that it's going to be outstanding and it's going to eventually become more prominent, much in the way that Barolo is right now. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please go ahead and smash that like button and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss the next one. I come out with videos like this at least once a week. Until then, drink well.